So I'm a retired Calgary Police Service officer with the Calgary Police Service for just over 21 years. I spent 8.5 years of those working in the high schools as a score resource officer. I fit into no box. And so when I became a cop, I never fit into this box as what a cop is supposed to be like. So all of a sudden now you're also real. That sure opens up a lot and takes down some walls. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be valued. That's all that many of us ask for. We don't know what people are going through. I really learned that on the job, but until you're actually put in that position, you have no clue how you'll react. You think you know. Sometimes we think, oh, well, that's the past. I don't want to remember the past. Sometimes the past is so beautiful, even if it is traumatic, because it tells your story. And like you said, it tells your story of how you got there, but you have a choice of now what you want to do with that. Believing in yourself as a parent, that you know your kids and that you know how they take things and ask them. That is what communication is about.
It's okay to not know all the answers, to not know exactly how I'm supposed to handle this situation. But a lot of times you'd be surprised how much they actually know what they need in that moment.
How amazing when you actually say to your kids, you know what? I really don't know what you need right now. Can you let me know? Because now you've even become more real to them. And you kind of watch these kids fall through the cracks nowadays. What are we not doing as a society to help them to keep going? Or no matter who you are or where you've come from, each of us has a diamond inside of us. No matter the traumas that you've had or the trials and tribulations that you've been through, we all have a tarnished diamond, but all it takes is one person to start polishing that diamond off, and we can start shining in ways that sometimes we did not even realize that we can shine.
Back, Wellness Ninjas, to another episode of the Wellness Dojo podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craig, and so excited today to have my friend Carlamay here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited as well. I've been reading your book, and we're going to get into that. But before we do, can you introduce yourself to my audience? Who are you? What do you do? Tell us your story.
Okay, well, so I'm a retired Calgary Police Service officer. I was with the Calgary Police Service for just over 21 years. I'm retired in May of 2023. Before that, did oil and gas, was for background psych and sociology, minor in music for schooling. Born in Edmonton. Go Edmonton Oilers.
Oh.
And I had to put that in there. And then moved to Calgary in 81. So pretty much my entire life, it feels like I've been here. But with the Calgary Police, I spent 8.5 years of those working in the high schools as a score resource officer. And that was, for me, probably one of the most impactful, and I think getting the impact from the kids and from administration and the school. And then I think also the amount of impact that I was able to have as well.
Yeah, and that's very evident as I've been reading through the book. So it's called The Youth Truth. And yeah, that's something that is just so blatantly obvious to me as I'm reading it, is not only how heavy some of that must be to have gone through, but how powerful and like transformative it must have been as an experience.
Well, and I think we forget as adults what youth are going through. And I mean, this was from stories, and I'll just give a little bit regarding the book.
Yeah,
so
please do.
It's called Youth Truth, and it's engaging in conversations that can change lives. And what I guess the first kind of 8 or 9 chapters are stories, and they're real stories of kids that I worked with and that were part of my world at that time. And then the last chapter kind of goes into tools of how any of us who have youth in our life, and that's whether parents, teachers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, we forget how many people are surrounded by youth, and how many people youth have in their life as resources. And it just gives tools of how we can help to engage in some of these hard conversations. We're talking about suicide. We're talking about sex. We're talking about pregnancy, domestic violence. I mean, that happens in teenage relationships. So what does a healthy relationship look like? So that is what this book is about. And I really felt that being able to, or I guess what we went through when we were growing up is very similar to what the kids went through back then, which was, I don't know what, 15, 14 years ago. And it still happens today. It just happens very differently because of social media. So stuff hasn't changed. And our conversations with our parents still have not changed, right? Yeah. We still fear coming forward to them about certain things.
Yeah. Do you think things are amplified now with social media?
Yes, I think so. And it's not only amplified. So I was asked this question regarding COVID. And you know how the kids had to go all online and mental health went through the roof. And when we actually look at it, I don't believe that all of a sudden mental health was, we had more mental health issues with youth. I just believe that all of a sudden stuff started coming to the surface because now we had to deal with it as parents, as teachers, in the fact of you have these kids who are really struggling at home. You can't be there for them as you were previous, but it's only online. But now you have them kind of all the time during the day. Instead of where, for lunchtime, people would kind of go off. Now some of the kids actually stayed in the room, right, on Zoom. So you started really seeing mental health come forward, and then stuff at home that was going on that people didn't know that was going on. Well, now when you're stuck with people that you don't get along with or struggle to communicate with pretty much 24/7, what do you do? Where do you turn?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I also believe that we were stuck with ourselves more than ever before too.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing this almost shift in the world in terms of people even just being more mindful and more accepting of like their spiritual sides and stuff. And I think that does have a lot to do with the fact that people were forced to go inward.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you were sitting with yourself a lot more than ever before during those times.
Well, and Pandora's box all of a sudden gets open.
Yeah.
And, whether or not you want to call them the demons inside of us sometimes, but some of those all of a sudden started showing their faces. We had to be vulnerable and all of a sudden authentic with ourselves. And we had to be graceful and loving and kind. And I think too, the forgiveness, all of a sudden, some of the things that we've gone through, I don't think many of us have forgiven ourselves. We'll forgive others, but a lot of us, we forget to forgive ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and that radiates through the book as I'm reading it as well, within these youth who you can just tell are, they do have this empathy, this compassion, even for themselves, even the ones that are like self-harming and stuff like that. But also so much of this fear and anxiety and pain that they're going through as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious, before we get too deep into like even some of the stories or anything like that, I'm curious, is that how you started in the Calgary Police Service? Was it like, did you go immediately into school resource?
No, so I spent the first 5 years on the street, and so worked in different districts around the city. And then I loved my career. I was able to go into sex crimes, child abuse, child at risk response, which is our CART unit, behavioral science unit, domestic violence or domestic conflict unit, school resource, diversity resource. I'm trying to think if there was any others. So it was neat to be able to go into so many different places and be able to kind of use what I had to work with people. And whatever unit though you go in, it's very interesting because communication and having those hard conversations always seem to come up everywhere. And so when in the schools, it was very prevalent that this was really hard with parents, with teens or youth, I guess we can call them. I kind of sat back and thought, as adults ourselves, we struggle having conversations with each other. So how are we supposed to be able to go and have them with our youth when we can't even have them either with our partners or with somebody at work?
Yeah.
Right?
So true. Yeah, communication is probably the greatest tool in the world for like all aspects of life. Conflict resolution, sales, like whatever it is that you're doing, communication is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to follow us everywhere.
It's so true.
Right.
It's so true. I know, like, I've talked to a few different people who have considered like becoming a police officer.
Yeah.
And one of the, like, I think it's such a daunting career choice for some people too. They're like, I would love to be able to help people and stuff, but like, I don't know if I could handle some of these situations. I'm just curious, from somebody who's done it, like, did those thoughts cross your mind as you're entering into the field? And
You know, to be honest, now that you've said that, they didn't. You know, what I was more so thinking of is the fighting. And because I came in, I mean, I love clothes, you know, hair and makeup were done. I had nails. So my first thought was, I've never been in a fight, right? I had never touched a gun at that time. And, you know, I was 26 years old when I came in, and I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be very different. And in training, we have a scenario where we do multiple assailants. And I counted 72 bruises on my body the one time when I came out of there. And I'm thinking, I don't know if this is going to be something I can do. I actually never thought of going and dealing with people's issues. And, you know, having to go be the first on scene for some stuff, that actually never came to mind. So it's interesting, actually, now that you said that, I'm thinking, you know what? I never thought of that. I wanted to go help people.
Yeah.
That was the big thing. And it sounds so cliche, but that was exactly what I wanted to go do.
Yeah. But that's, I think, the signs of an empath, right? Is like somebody who you don't really have to think, you just want to help.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think when you get into that scenario or situation, you learn very fast, you know, there's A, B, C, and D, right? It's not just, there's never one way to deal with a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And you prove, I think it's only in those moments that you prove what you're capable of. Like, you have to, so I have this, this idea that I relate back to through martial arts, where you're on the edge of the ring, and you know that your opponent that you're about to fight has trained, you know they're prepared, you've trained, you're prepared, but like, the opponent is not the person that you're worried about. The real fight is like, what's happening inside your head. How am I going to handle this situation? Am I good enough? Am I prepared enough? Like, are they stronger? Like, all these different kind of fears and limiting beliefs, self-doubt, all that stuff, right? But then it's like, you're just like that one step away. You step into that ring, or you step into that house or that situation, and you learn that you can handle these things, and you learn to trust yourself, right?
Well, and I think you actually stated it very well. It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. It's what matters is what you do. And so when you step into that house, for us, it was like, okay, all that matters right now is I'm going home at the end of the night, and I'm not sure what anybody else is going to do, but I know when I get in there, if something happens, I know what I need to do.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's hard because we want to control situations, right? We want to know what's going to happen and what the outcome's going to be, and a lot of times we don't.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about communication, because we touched on that, and something that I've really recognized through reading the stories in the book is you just seem to have this quality where these youth feel so comfortable coming to you in so many situations. And I think that's a form of communication as well. There's something that you're doing that is giving this feeling, this sense of comfort to the youth who are coming up to you and approaching you in these situations. And without that first, like, who knows what kind of, like, how much worse things could get. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what is it about you that these youth feel so comfortable coming up to in a lot of these situations?
Well, I think number one is there's no judgment. Growing up, I never fit in anywhere. I was always very different. I'm very, creative, musical. That was kind of, I fit into no box. And so when I became a cop, I never fit into this box as what a cop is supposed to be like. I remember somebody telling me that I always had like a pink fingernail sticking out or a pink toenail, because no matter how many times people could squish me in. And so when the youth would come and talk, like I had an open door policy, but as soon as you walked in, though, there was respect. So whatever you were going through, nobody knows what anybody's going through. And so always just be kind, right? Be kind and gracious. And so it was the no judgment. It was just asking what they need. Like, do they just need to talk, or do they actually need, I don't want to say advice, but do they need some help in a situation? That was a big thing, I think, was the no judgment. And like in the book, and I think as adults, we make assumptions about our youth or about anybody, and then others make assumptions about us. Very few times do we actually come together and communicate about these assumptions. And so when I would sit down with the youth and let them know what I went through, I mean, I went through bullying. I went through times where I didn't know if I wanted to be here, but I had, people to talk to, and I was able to communicate. And so all of a sudden now you're also real. And that sure opens up a lot and takes down some walls.
Yeah, and what really resonated for me as well is they felt seen by you. And that's something that seemed to kind of pop up through the language in the book and the stories. Not even that you're saying it in the writing, but you can just sense it in the stories that these kids felt seen when they were with you. And I think that's something that's just so powerful. They just want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be recognized that like their struggle is real and legitimate.
Yeah. And funny when you think about it, as adults, it's the exact same thing. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be valued. That's all that many of us ask for. Yeah. Right. And we fail as adults to do that. And so how can we give that to our youth if we can't even give each other that as adults?
So where does that start, do you think?
I think a lot of it starts in the home. But I think, too, we only do what we know and what we've been taught by our parents, right? So I have a 16-year-old son. And the other day we were driving, and because, he's driving now. And so it's kind of like, well, Mom, when can I use the vehicle? And, I don't want to seem naggy at him, be careful, be this, because he's an excellent driver, and he's and very responsible, especially for a 16-year-old boy. Yeah. But I also still need to be a parent and have guidelines, like guardrails, I guess we can call them. So we were just driving, and I said the other day, you know what? I said, I don't want to come across as nagging, and I don't want to come across as meddling. So I said, each season you need something different as you're growing up. I said, what do you need now from me that would really help? And it really made him stop and think. And he goes, I'll have to get back to you. Perfect. But I think that one of the things as parents is we need to check with our youth, especially, and I mean age appropriate, but what are they needing? And again, it's a hard conversation. What do you need from me right now? What do you wish that you and I could maybe do? And one of the things that I found was really good is the love languages, but to actually do the love language teen quiz. It's free online. And I think we'd all be surprised, because if we think our kids, it's, what we give them, a lot of times it's quality time. And that just means even sitting and watching a movie, but us not on our phones.
Yeah, that's so true and so powerful. Yeah. I think like what you said too, just asking the questions like that, and what a mature answer from your son too. Like, I need time to think about it. Right?
I think he was like kind of
a little taken back,
because usually it's like, hey, don't, can you be home around this time? Where are you going? But they're questions that for safety. And I mean, being a cop, my goodness, I saw the worst of the worst at the worst times. So, and he gets that. But I think it was just all of a sudden giving the options. And that's one thing as parents, I believe we forget, is when we were growing up, we love to be able to have options and make our own decision. And I think as parents, we set our boundaries or our guardrails, for protection. But again, even something like, here's 3 outfits to choose from. You've got your guardrails, but now they have a choice. And the amount of confidence and independence that even just something as small as that gives a child or a youth is amazing.
Yeah.
And that also opens up something else for them next time to be able to come and talk with you about.
Yeah. The thing that comes to my mind is empowerment.
Huge.
We want to empower our kids. We want to empower, whether it's your own personal child, or whether it's I approach it this way now in teaching martial arts. It's not so much about I have to feed them these lessons. It's more about empowering them to learn these lessons and giving them the choices to learn the lessons. Right?
Well, and they'll go back. I still get Facebook messages now from kids. I mean, they're not kids anymore. They're in their 20s. But ones that were at the high school when I was there, that all of a sudden come back and say, you know what? I remember you saying this, or I was in a situation and I heard your little voice at the back saying, you know what, you can do this, or, make sure you check all areas, or, something, whatever it was. Sometimes I don't even remember. But whatever that was, it was enough that it made an impact now. And this is 16 years later, right?
Yeah.
So you never know, and you never know how somebody's going to take it.
Yeah. Yes, it's really being delicate with every situation is so important.
And put yourself, I think, in their shoes too. We don't know what people are going through, and I think I really learned that on the job, because it was very quick to criticize somebody for what they did or their actions. But until you're actually put in that position, you have no clue how you'll react. You think but probably in martial arts, I noticed this a lot with some of our recruits as they were coming through, and we got trained in fighting and got trained in certain things, and we had officers who came in and they had martial arts background, they had hockey background. Well, you learn to fight in a certain way, and we're trained a certain way, but when you are under stress, you revert back to what you remember. Right. And so we would see all of a sudden these guys getting into literal hockey fights, and you're sitting here going, holy cow, you're just waiting for the jersey that didn't, that wasn't there to come off. But that was what it was. So I think that's even when us as parents are talking to our kids, that's what we revert back to, is what we know. Yeah. Right. And how our parents handled us as well.
Yeah. It takes a lot of training to untrain, in a sense. And I've been doing a lot of thinking in the last couple of years around not what does it mean to be a man, but also what does it mean to be an adult. And I think that's a big part of it, is when we start to recognize what is ours and what was kind of given to us or passed down to us, and when we start to live our lives in a way of what is ours solely, I think that's when we truly start to become adults.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, it's true. And your authentic self is there. Well, and I think too, we have to take accountability, and that's a huge thing as well. Yeah. And you can't blame anybody else. Well, you can, but it comes down to the point of, well, okay, I made that choice. So, but it's being accountable to ourselves as well.
Yeah. There's this saying that sticks with me, and it's what is it? Your trauma explains your behavior, but it doesn't excuse your behavior.
Yes.
So it's okay, this is why I am the way that I am right now, but it's now my responsibility for myself, and if you have kids, for your kids as well, to start to reverse that cycle, start to break it, and start to live life in your way. Yeah. Right.
And if your kids can see that, that's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where that empowerment really does come from too. They see you taking control of your life, and that empowers them to then say, yeah, I can do that too. I don't have to live life the same way that you did either. Yeah. Please don't.
Well, it's true. Well, and as you're saying that, once I retired from CPS, I wrote the book and then have been doing speaking and workshops, and for me, just even for my son to be able to see that, you had this job for however long, or this career, and now all of a sudden you're going in a different direction, but you're still using like what you learned from there, even from as I was growing up, what you learned, because those are your stories, right? And I think sometimes we think, oh, well, that's the past. I don't want to remember the past. But I think sometimes the past is so beautiful, even if it is traumatic, because it tells your story. And like you said, it tells your story of how you got there, but you have a choice of now what you want to do with that. Right?
Yeah. It's so funny because I was just writing something just the other day, and that's kind of one of the things I was writing was, I'm realizing now in life that I will never fully like release the pains and the traumas that I've been through in my life. But that's a good thing because that serves as a memory, and those memories serve as a reminder of like my resilience and my strength and like that I am here today through it, right?
Yeah. And that's huge. And that's a lot of times what our kids see. They see what you've been through and how you have gotten through it. Yeah.
You mentioned something before when we were talking about communication, and you said age dependent. And so I'm curious what you meant by that in terms of, because I've got a 14-year-old, I've got an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. So these like very different stages in life in a sense.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you, through your experience and through what you've learned working with youth, how do I approach communication differently with those three?
Well, we know our kids. And I think that that's one thing as parents, we forget that we actually know our kids.
Yeah.
And I always love how people come and tell you how to raise your kids.
Yeah.
Right? And you know what? Love on them and thank them. But nobody really knows our kids as well as we know our kids.
Yeah.
Even the grandparents don't know them as well as we know them.
Yeah.
So there's some things that, say, for instance, a 12-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl are, even though they're the same age, a 12-year-old boy may not be at a point for talking about certain things, whereas a 12-year-old girl would. And again, that's just the whole brain thing. But again, it goes down to us knowing our kids. And so, for instance, with an 8-year-old, they might come in, and even the way they talk about suicide, for instance, maybe they have a friend who is depressed, and they'll bring it up in a very different way than, say, a 12-year-old saying, yeah, mom, they want to kill themselves. Okay, very blunt, very out there. But an 8-year-old, maybe not wanting to talk about suicide and what it actually is, may come up and just, use mom, they kind of have been talking about, they don't really want to be around, and I'm not fully understanding what that means because, they live next door, and, like that kind of thing. So that's kind of what that age dependent talking to is. And even with communication wise, just in general, we know, again, some of our kids need an ABC and 1, 2, 3 for steps or directions. Whereas other kids, you can give them a whole list and they'll just take it and go. So again, it's believing in yourself as a parent that you know your kids and that you know how they take things, and ask them. If you give them a whole list and they're just staring at you like a deer in headlights, don't be afraid to ask them and say, hey, do you need me just to give you, say, 3 things? Or do you want to just talk about 1 or 2 of these things? Then we can come back later. And I think that is what communication is about.
Yeah. And I think that is something, I'm so glad you said that, because that's the thing that I'm learning as a parent as well, is to ask. It's okay to not know all the answers. It's okay to not know exactly how I'm supposed to handle this situation. But a lot of times you'd be surprised how much they actually know what they need in that moment.
Yes.
Like, we don't know what they need.
No,
and that's
we
okay.
don't. Yeah.
And that's okay.
And how amazing when you actually say to your kids, you know what? I really don't know what you need right now. Can you let me know? Or because now you've even become more real to them, that you don't know everything and it's okay.
Yeah. 100%.
You ask.
100%.
Right?
Yeah. And I imagine that's one of the things that probably drew some of these youth to come and approach you when they were going through struggles as well, because they probably knew just through interactions and maybe through other stories that maybe they heard from other friends and stuff like that, that you are that type of person where, I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear you. That's powerful.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. You also mentioned that you still hear from some of these people that you've interacted with through high schools and stuff like that. Is there anything that, I'm curious, that like really stands out in your mind of a story or something of somebody who reached back out to you and it has stuck with you?
Well, there's been a few. I mean, where kids that you literally helped walk across the stage because they were not going to graduate and just barely made it, to all of a sudden you getting a message that they're inviting you to their convocation at, engineering school for university. And you just sit back and think, wow, like what happened? But then there's some of those sad stories where, these kids that had scholarships and all of this kind of stuff. And, they, like basketball, like one story, for instance, basketball was a huge one at one of the schools I was at. And this one kid had scholarships for American universities and was ready to go. And then all of a sudden they leave high school, and those kind of that summer and into that first year, something happens. And it's like we lose our kids and there's that gap. And all of a sudden I had heard that something had happened, and now he had gotten into the wrong crowd and had lost his scholarships and, had spent some jail time. And for me, I kind of sat back and it actually affected me more so than I thought, because I thought, where did we go wrong? Like, where did we lose this child? And I still call them children because, they were kind of like my kids at school. But yeah, it's where did we lose them? And you kind of watch these kids fall through the cracks nowadays and thinking, where have we lost them? Or what are we not doing as a society to help them to keep going, or to be able to have resources out there? Or even as parents to say, you know what, no matter what, we're still here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, like, what you think the answer to that question is. Like, where do we lose them? Why do they slip through the cracks?
Well, I think communication's a huge one. And I think the assumptions. I watched in classrooms where, and again, nothing with the teachers or the aides, because some of these teachers and aides are dealing with a lot of kids and kids that have a lot of issues going on. But there were so many kids, and you have your few that maybe need to have that attention all the time. You have those others that, again, are feeling not seen, not heard, but they've got to keep going. And so they just slowly fall through the cracks. And then as they get older, they've learned that they just don't matter, even though that has nothing to do with what actually was there. Because some of these teachers I worked with were the most caring teachers that anybody could ever have. But there's just so much overwhelmness within the systems, and the kids start feeling like they're just not worth it. And you start getting into groups where they prey on the vulnerable. And that's what happens, right? Yeah. Now, again, not for everybody, but if you have a home life that is not great, or your parents have gone through a divorce and you have not, as a child or a youth, have not been able to talk about it, you hold that in. Then something else happens, you hold that in. Where do you go? You'll go to social media, you'll go to friends, I'm putting in quotes, right? Because you've never met them, but they're online. And they start giving you some opinions, and not always good ones. And then stuff, just start going down that rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to use the example of the very first chapter in the book. As I was reading it, I was laying in bed. It was like probably 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Laying in bed, I'm like, I'm going to read and get myself like ready to sleep. And I think I was telling you, I was like, I actually had to like stop reading because I noticed myself getting like, I was like super into the story. It was intense.
Yep.
And I remember, so I was like, I'm going to finish this tomorrow. But then in my mind, I couldn't tell. I'm like, is this going to be a happy ending or is this going to be a sad ending? And I think that speaks to probably how we feel in real life a lot of the times when we're seeing people going through difficult things like addiction and depression and all of these awful things that people go through. And the fact of the matter is, it's real.
Yeah.
Like, these things are actually happening. Like, I'm reading the stories in a book, but these things actually happened. These are real situations that are happening even today. And we have to realize that, like, these people are up against like real challenges. And even though they get through one situation, that doesn't mean that it's solved. Like, tomorrow's a new challenge. Tomorrow's a new struggle. And so it's like, I don't know. It's just like, it's daunting, but it's also inspiring as well, because even though there's new challenges there's new opportunities too. But that was really highlighted in that first chapter, that I really felt that I was like I was really on the edge, not finishing the chapter. And I was like, is this going to be a happy ending or a sad ending? And luckily a lot of the stories do have happy endings, at least in the book.
Yeah.
But some of them don't. And it brings this real reality to it, to me.
Well, and I think, when we were growing up, like we've talked about before, we dealt with all of this stuff. It just wasn't all over places or really talked about unless you actually sat and talked to somebody about it. And stuff hasn't changed. The things that our youth and our kids are going through hasn't changed. But you bring in social media, and now it is right in your face. And, I would explain it of, getting on a school bus. When we were going to school, and I think I'm older than you. So when I was going to school, we would either walk home from school or get on a school bus.
Yeah.
Whatever was happening at school was done. It was left there. So you knew when you got home, unless you had dance class or gymnastics or whatever with somebody from school, you knew that you had, a good span of hours to just be at home with yourself, just hanging with your family, that kind of stuff. Now, with phones, kids leave and everything trails with them. And as parents, if we don't set, our guardrails, and you know what, these are protective boundaries, guardrails, whatever you want to call them, but it's a type of protection for our kids, where it's like, 7:30 you get home, the phone's in the kitchen, and that's it for the night. We're going to spend some time, homework, family time, supper. If you do not put those in place, our kids, we're starting to lose our kids, and they're now dealing with adult issues while they're still young. Their phones are being put underneath their pillows, and they're not even getting into REM sleep because it vibrates, and it's like, oh, I'm missing something.
Yeah.
Or how many likes they have is telling how their self-image, their self-confidence, that's who they are as a person, is because somebody has liked their post. And you sit back and think, wow, like, if that's what our youth are going on, oh my gosh, I don't know if I would have survived. If I look, if I'm going to really take a good hard look at stuff. And that is, I believe now, what we're dealing with. Again, it's the same issues, but everything, you can look up stuff online now, how to do things. Oh my goodness. If we're dealing with kids with depression, or somebody goes online and says, you know what, you shouldn't even be around, or, go and kill yourself, go and hurt yourself. That's what kids are getting on their posts. Right? And if they're not talking to anybody about it, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, and you're right. They just there's no break from it.
No.
Like the kid who used to go home and have that escape from the bully because now they were home safe.
Yep.
That bully's now...
It's 24/7.
It's online now. It's unless they take the action to cut themselves off and stuff, right? Yeah. And then if you do, then you don't fit in even more. Yeah, it's this nasty cycle.
And if you have nobody to talk to, I was doing a presentation for some younger kids, and one of the kids asked me, well, what did you do to block somebody when you were growing up? And I said, well, that landline phone, we just took the phone off the hook. Right? Yeah. Because, they were saying, well, all I do is press on block now. And so, it kind of made me sit and think, yeah, I guess, how did we when we didn't want to deal with people? Well, we did. We took the phone off the hook, or we just told our parents, please let them, I don't want to talk to anybody. So we were busy. Yeah. Or you just let it ring and go to voicemail or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
But there was always an out. Now, how do you have an out? And sometimes that means parents have to have some tough love, right? And you actually have to parent.
Yeah, and I think teaching the tools as well to manage these new things. Like as parents and adults, I think we have a responsibility to almost keep up with the technology in a sense, and like try to not just learn but understand like what it is that is happening on that phone, what it is, what are these new social media platforms, what are these new apps, what is TikTok? What is, like, I try and be on those things. And part of the reason is because I want to understand it. I want to see what's trending and stuff like that, so that I, first of all, can be a cool dad.
Yeah.
and embarrass my kids.
I know that.
Embarrass my kids with all the Gen Z terms. But it's also partly so that I'm just like have an awareness of what is out there. Like what is happening? What are the algorithms throwing our way?
And ask questions. I think, how cool is it to be able to go to your kid and say, hey, you know what? Can you explain this to me? Like, show me. Because I really don't understand how this works. And sometimes kids are like, oh, you're so old. But other times they're like, yeah. And, even in the book, one of the tools is that safe space. Well, what does that safe space look like for being with your kids? And every kid is different. And that could be as easy as, if your kid games, ask them to teach you how to game, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You might not talk, but you've just allowed a barrier to come down that your child is valued, they're important, and they're seen and heard at that time. And the next time they come to you, maybe with something that actually is going on.
Yeah.
And it's just gaming.
Yeah.
Right?
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, another thing that came to mind for me was the negativity can be really loud online, not just online, but in particular online.
Yeah.
But I think there is a lot of positive out there as well. And this gets highlighted by the algorithms. And this is where there's an argument as well that social media is not like inherently bad. It kind of exposes us. And I think the algorithms really expose us in a sense.
Yeah.
Because if you're watching negative things, it will feed you more negative things. But if you can learn to set and I've played with this on my own social media, whereas like if I learn to swipe faster on certain things, I see something negative and I swipe faster, all of a sudden more positive messages start popping up. And so I think there's something there of like the positivity is out there.
Yes.
We just need to work on making it louder. And thank God for people like you who are out there spreading these stories and spreading these positive messages about how we can help, because we need that in society.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because my son had said one day, Mom, why is there always like puppies and stuff coming up on your Facebook feed? And you know what? I actually never thought of that, but they make me happy. Like just watching these tiny little, like, little puppies or brand new babies doing, things.
Yeah.
That I remember when our puppy was that big and when, my son was that small, and those little things, but those make me happy. They fill me with joy. And so it was funny that he actually said that, but that's a lot what comes up on my feed, but I believe that that's really true. And I think it's moderation. Again, there's negative stuff everywhere in the world.
Yep.
And again, as parents, that's where we need to step in and bring some positive in. Does that mean having a board night or board game night or a movie night or a something? But that also is put on us to bring that in as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know there's some people out there that might be steaming from what I just said. Like, it's not inherently bad, and like it's kind of on us to make it louder. But I will also say that I think it's so easy with the algorithms now for things to snowball in one direction or the other.
Down that rabbit hole.
Like I'll send like a funny reel to a friend of mine, and all of a sudden 10 more of reels that are like very similar humor will pop up. And it's very evident that the algorithms, so if you're watching something that says like that's really negative and dark, and maybe you're feeling sad, and so you're watching those things because it resonates. Yeah. Well, the algorithm is going to keep feeding you that. So it becomes very difficult, and I've been there. It becomes very difficult then, because now that's the messaging that's constantly being pumped into you.
Yeah.
it's extra work now to step away from that negativity and to find that happier, lighter voice again.
Well, and sometimes it means putting your phone down.
Yeah.
Right. And actually just stepping away.
It's like the
from
detox.
That.
Yeah.
It is. Well, and they're finding more and more that social media and even selfies, and they're becoming an addiction. Right. And so again, it's in moderation.
Yeah.
And we know ourselves, and sometimes we can't put it down. So we may have to ask somebody to say, hey, you know what? Can you watch, if all of a sudden you see me on my phone again, you know, and it's great for our kids, you know, hey, can you guys tell me when I'm on my phone again? Because sometimes I don't even realize, hey, Dad, you're on your phone. Okay, yeah, sorry. But again, it's asking for help. And then that allows our kids to see that, hey, sometimes we can't do it on our own.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just finished chapter 8, I was telling you. And in chapter 8, the story kind of, I don't want to give too much away for people who are going to read it, but the parents are struggling and they're fighting and they're essentially kind of neglecting the kids. Not kind of, they're very much neglecting the kids, and the kids are kind of left on the wayside. I think that chapter really highlights the importance of two things. One, as adults, we have a responsibility to deal with our shit and to just continue to work and to try and be better for ourselves, which inherently will then kind of make us better for our kids and set them up better. But then also the importance of us people who are passionate about this work to do the work and to help teach these tools to the kids who don't have that. Yeah. Because so many people don't have that. Yeah. Right. So it's so important on like those two levels, like adults teaching adults and also adults taking the steps and actions is what I'm hearing. Yeah. To really take care of themselves so they can be better for everybody else. But then also teaching the youth that, you know, just because you don't have that here doesn't mean you can't learn these skills, doesn't mean you can't do it.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to where the assumptions are. We assume that everybody was raised, you know, oh, well, you understand, you had this. But we forget that not everybody comes from where we've come from. Yeah. Right? Or not everybody has had the upbringing, or stuff has happened in their lives that we don't even realize. And maybe a trauma happened earlier on where they literally are stuck as a 13 or 14-year-old emotionally. And now they're in their 30s. And that's what they keep reverting back to because they don't understand. Yeah. So yeah, education is huge. Yeah. And that's the one thing with this book is just the tools and what that looks like, and asking for help. It's okay to ask. Yeah. You know, and even the whole thing with failure, and like I hate that word failure because people have such a negative feeling when you say that, but yet we all need to fail in order to know the resilience that comes back from it and what we can do more. Yeah. And as parents, we've all failed. Yeah. Right? Daily. Yeah. Yeah. Some days I'm thinking, oh my gosh, do I even want to get out of bed? 'Cause who knows what's going to happen today? But again, it's like we just kind of get up, go, and that's where the resilience keeps coming.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I wish I had read this book. I was doing work with a nonprofit where we were working with youth and teens that were just not in great situations. Yeah. And I remember walking into that job at first and feeling so overwhelmed. It's like, who am I to like help these kids? And I don't like, I was just like, I was overwhelmed with like what I needed to learn to understand with them. Yeah. And as I've been reading this book, I've had that thought pop up a few times. It's like, just reading the stories gives you this level of understanding and almost a sense of empathy that I don't think I had before. Like, I've always been very empathetic, but I think it is so powerful to be able to hear these stories, because I was just talking with somebody this morning as well, and I was like, you know, it's easy to read these things, but like when you actually think about it, like, this happened in my city, like this happens these things are happening every single day. And I'll give you one quick story, and then I have a fun question for you. Okay. But I worked as a massage therapist for many years, and I had a client once who was a 911 dispatch. Like, she took the calls. Yeah. And I remember she said something to me one day, that has always really stuck with me. And she's like, if you only knew the calls that we get on a daily basis, like you might not sleep at night, kind of thing. And it was just this awareness, not to be negative or to create fear or anything, but it was just this awareness of like, these real things are happening on a daily basis. And for me, it's a reminder of what you said before. It's like, always just be kind to people, because you have no idea the impact that you even just saying, hey, on the street might have to somebody. That person now feels seen. When maybe they haven't felt seen in a long time. It's
so true. And you know, it takes me back to even when I was working with some of the different partners on the street, and we would go to, say it was the 5th or 6th break and enter call, and you walk into this house, and I always remember talking to my partners and saying, you know what, when we walk in, these people maybe have never had to deal with police before. Nothing like this has ever happened, and now their place of sanctuary has now been harmed, right? And their safe space is not safe anymore. So when you go in, treat it like this is your one and only call, and that every ounce of your understanding, empathy, and everything is just with this family as you're talking with them. Because again, they may never call police again because nothing may happen. And this one and only interaction may be it. So, and that is, I think, even when we're dealing with people, you never know, you know, even somebody in the grocery store, you're looking at them, or somebody driving and you're behind them and they're going so slow and you're like, oh my goodness. Well, maybe they just got news that their spouse has cancer and they have, you know, a few months to live, and they're trying to process it all. We don't know.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, instead of driving by, giving them the finger and like shaking your head, it's like, you know what? Move around them. Don't try to cut them off because, you know, you're ticked off at them. But just realize we really don't know what everybody's going through.
Yeah. And it's a choice.
Yeah.
Like I've like pissed so many people off because I am thinking that way. They'll be like, why is this person doing this? And I'm sitting in the passenger seat and I'm like, well, maybe like, or like, why that idiot just drove so fast. I'm like, maybe their kid's in the hospital.
Yeah.
And that's why they're driving that way. Like, I'm sure, sure, it's still not safe for them to do that, but like, if you stop and wonder and get curious about why, I think that really opens the door to perspective and a little bit more empathy.
Yeah.
Or even at the lowest thing, like maybe just like a little bit of sympathy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, I have a fun one for you. Okay, so my last guest wrote a question.
Okay.
I haven't read it yet, so I don't know what it says, but I'm going to ask you that question, and then I'll give you the same opportunity to leave a question for my next guest.
Okay.
Okay? You ready for this?
Okay.
Okay, let's see if I can read this here. Okay, this is deep. You ready?
No, okay.
Okay. What do you currently need to release? What are you carrying with you that is affecting you and the relationships around you? So I'll read it one more time for you.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you need to release? What are you carrying with you that is affecting you and the relationships around you?
Wow, that's pretty deep. Like very deep. Okay. The first thing that came to mind is, especially now as an entrepreneur, and, you know, before with the career, you had a regular income, all that kind of stuff. Though I think the biggest thing I need to release is that everything's in God's hands and is in his control, because right now, I want things to happen quick. And, you know, even with the book, I just actually found out that I just had 10 people in the UK purchase my book. Nice. So it's pretty cool to think now, I guess I'm international.
Yeah. Congrats.
Thanks. But, you know, I kind of thought things would happen quicker. And it's like, you know, I'm getting different speaking engagements now and different schools and speaking at the teachers' conventions coming up for Alberta. And I always want things quicker, but I have to realize that it's all in timing. And sometimes I think even with relationships, that's something, but I believe and even have noticed this last year, certain people have been brought into my life at exactly the right time. And people have been taken out of my life at exactly the right time. So I think that for me is kind of releasing that, just to let it be.
Yeah.
And let things come as they are ready, because I know that as I've wanted stuff, and if everything came as I wanted it, I don't think I'd be ready.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that releasing of control.
Yeah.
So
it's
powerful.
like
Yeah.
what I look at it is I'm harvesting.
Yeah.
And as everything, gets ready and prepared, the more plentiful stuff is. And that's what I just have to remember.
Very powerful.
So, yeah. Wow, that made me have to stop.
I love
like,
the
oh.
answer. It was great. It resonates deeply with me too as an entrepreneur, and it's
hard.
It's hard,
Right?
because you have big dreams, you have big things that you want to accomplish. Even in relationships too,
Well,
like
even
you said.
the impact that I believe that I'm supposed to have out there.
Yeah.
Right? But to be able to get it out there, people don't know who you are.
Yep. Yeah. And that's why I love doing this.
Yeah.
That's why I love having the podcast, and even just in my business, just approaching things as a collective, because I really do believe that we all, like you and I, everybody that's kind of like in our circles that we've now started to see that like we have similar circles, right? But it's because we are people of impact. We are people who do want to create good in the world. And I believe everybody, for the most part, does have a part of them that wants to create good in the world. But when we're stuck trying to control and do it ourselves is the thing that I've learned, that things fall into place so much easier when we do it as a collective and we can work together.
Well, and it goes back to it takes a village, right?
Yep.
And I really believe that. And the one thing I've really noticed is the empowering of each other. Mm-hmm. And I always use the term, fixing each other's crowns instead of tearing each other down. And that, when I look at it, because, when I go out and speak to women's groups and stuff, as women, we can be nasty to each other. But when we start working together and seeing how we can support each other, man, things just go. And it kind of takes me, the company that I have is called Diamond in the Rough. And the whole thing behind that is, no matter who you are or where you've come from, each of us has a diamond inside of us. No matter the traumas that you've had or the trials and tribulations that you've been through, we all have a tarnished diamond. But all it takes is one person to start polishing that diamond off, and we can start shining in ways that sometimes we did not even realize that we can shine. And it doesn't matter if you're a youth, a newcomer, a parent, whoever you are, we all have that. And I think just remembering that one thing that we say to somebody is so important, because you never know how that can affect somebody.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I appreciate you being on the show. This was so fun. Thanks so much for being here. This is great.
Thank you. I was honored to be here, so thank you so much.
Great. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Perfect.
So. Awesome. And thanks to everybody for listening and watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.